What I want to do is give you a little story about the zero waste movement in New Zealand, and I suppose you could call it when good campaigns go wrong, or you could call it lessons that we learn when we make mistakes. At the same time, so there's been a lot of successes, but there's also been great things to learn from, and I think that's the most important thing. We have a history of doing things sort of overnight as a country. For example, just explain, going from this very command and control economy to a very liberal one overnight. An idea spreads around our country pretty quickly. We were the first country in the world to give women the vote, and we were the first country to go nuclear free. And I moved to the very top of the North Island quite a long time ago, and when this restructuring of the economy occurred, local communities, because they sold off all the state assets to overseas companies, and those big companies dropped all the local branches and halved the number of people working, so we suddenly had a massive rise in unemployment. And the town I was in, went from full employment, only one person officially unemployed, to a massive number of unemployed people. Met a guy who was also passionate about trying to do something, and we decided to set up a community-owned company to try and bid for contracts that would otherwise be won by big outside companies, and then use local people to run them rather than just the people at the very bottom who do the actual hard work, but the management and retain skills in our community. That was 20 years ago. That company is called CBEC, C-B-E-C. It runs about 7 or 8 businesses. It has joint ventures with Maori tribal groups, and it has joint ventures in other parts of the country and helped other groups do the same thing. We set up New Zealand's first rural recycling program, and sort of that gives you the title expert somehow, and I managed to get the contract to set up Auckland City's curbside recycling scheme. And I did that for a year, and then I heard that one of the richest guys in New Zealand was setting up a trust. And I'd seen all these rich guys that had made all their money, set these trusts up, and then they end up perpetuating a sort of a dependence mentality, which actually takes away the entrepreneurial, it transfers entrepreneurship from people thinking up ideas and actually setting businesses up to how can we extract grants to do, create a non-profit to extract grants to survive. So I wrote to this guy, I said, look, we've trialled this idea of community business in New Zealand, in the north, and it's really worked. And you could perhaps use your money to foster that type of thing around the country, rather than, so it's self-reliance rather than dependency. And this guy ran a business that was completely at odds with what we stand here, what we all stand for. And I had seen the impact. It was a sort of a copy of Walmart. He went and met Sam Walton and copied the exact recipe for a chain of stores around New Zealand. And he had about 100 at the time, with about a $2 billion turnover or annual revenue. And he had floated the company on the stock market and put half the money into this fund. He asked me to help him set the foundation up, which I did. And I immediately convinced him of this idea of zero waste. Or actually total recycling. We were more talking about, inspired by Dan Knapp and others. And then the idea of zero waste came about. We'd heard about it from Honda and other big corporations, and we thought, well, why don't we actually go for that and brand that as a campaign? And he agreed to fund the trust. And I think then we convinced the government to give us money to fund it, and we went around convincing councils to adopt zero waste. And we ended up with about, I think, close to 70% of the councils in the country with zero waste. We were able to resource a whole lot of people that had never had money before to go out there and push their vision, and suddenly a sort of a marginalised vision of how the world could be was resourced. Now, at the same time, I decided if I'm going to take this guy's money, I'm going to have to work on his company and see if we can change that so it's more community friendly, because that was also very important to me. And the company adopted zero waste, and we put a 5-point action strategy for the company to get rid of sweatshops and to reduce its impact on local communities and get things made in New Zealand rather than everything in China and so on. And that sounded good. And so on that basis, I felt we're making progress. We bought Paul Hawken out, we bought Paul Connett, we bought Dan Knapp, we bought everyone we could. We had the money, we bought people out to get a momentum going in our country. And eventually we convinced the government to become the first country in the world to adopt a national vision of zero waste. I wanted a date and so on, but I was able to get the government to adopt that. And we really felt we had a momentum. Other countries were coming out to see what we were doing. Engineers who before were really reluctant were suddenly feeling empowered, especially the ones who had a deep feeling something was wrong, and they were actually redesigning the contracts. We set up a Zero Waste Academy with the Massey University and the City of Palmerston North, a joint venture. That is still going. And we set up a consulting group called Waste Not, a network of zero waste advisors who before had never earned any money, but suddenly they were out there advising because they had the zero waste brand and knowledge. And we also set up a fund to fund entrepreneurs with new ideas, the Recycle Loans Fund, to fund seed funding and technical support and so on and so on. So we had this sort of matrix of things that we felt would create a new fabric upon which a zero waste society could emerge. But I had a serious problem in that this guy that owned this corporation was using the work that we were all doing to validate his company rather than change it. And the work I was doing with his senior executives was actually being stopped in its tracks deep down in the system. And so the company was really business as usual and tacking on a little bit of green, but leveraging off all this community action around the country. Plus, it was silencing the criticism of his company because the money that people were getting, they no longer felt like criticizing. So I put a challenge to him that we had to realign ourselves, and I personally could not continue if he was not going to walk the talk with his company, if he's just going to use it as PR. I felt that the damage his company was doing with the irresponsible supply chain direct from China through to our landfills, essentially, was far more than any good we were doing with zero waste. If he was sticking with the program that we had agreed, then I would have been fine as long as that progress was going on. So the end result of that was that became a very public disagreement. I resigned. 60 Minutes New Zealand did a program on it and became a very high-profile battle between him and I. And the zero waste movement, in a sense, started to collapse from that moment on, resulting in the government has actually withdrawn its zero waste goal. A number of the cities now have become embarrassed by their zero waste target and don't even mention it. It's not even though it's still policy. So a lot of money, a great wave of enthusiasm, and it's like a wave that crashes. But the result now is that we have the DNA of zero waste built into some cities. In Auckland City, which is 1/3 of our population, they are absolutely driving zero waste. And I proposed to them about 5 years ago that we actually look on waste as a system, and that we design a new system of the way resources flow through Auckland City from the ground up, presuming that we don't have transfer stations and we don't have large waste companies controlling that resource. And they have actually adopted that based on a network of 7 very, very big resource recovery park hubs with around about 100 community recycling centres feeding into them. So we're replacing a waste system with a resource recovery business trading system. So we're rebuilding now. We've done the big enthusiastic thing. We've fallen over, and now we're rebuilding. So wish us luck.